Okay, here we go. Continuing chapter 11. When Hedgehog Court had taken itself seriously as a stately house, this had been the library. About a third of the space occupied the lower half of the turret and projected out over the street. The rest of the study sat directly over the living room. In addition to having bookshelves set into several sections of the turret walls, it had a big walnut dining table that her parents used as a desk, a blocky chaise lounge, and an overstuffed chair that faced the carved cabinet that hid the TV, and, most important, a fireplace that shared a chimney with the one in the room below, where her parents were currently entertaining their guests. Marzana opened the doors of the media cabinet. She tossed Ciro the remote. "Find something, please." "Is the lady with the tats likely to throw cookies from a box on a plate or bake them?" Ciro asked as he dropped onto the chaise and began pushing buttons. "How much time do we have? And is she going to feel like she has to chaperone?" "She'll bake them, but she keeps dough already made in the freezer," Marzana said, kneeling and leaning carefully into the fireplace. There was no hearth here, just a massive, time-polished piece of sandstone set into the hardwood floor. "The dough will have to defrost a little, and the oven's got to preheat, so she can't put them in right away. She'll bring drinks and fruit or something up first to tide us over, so I'm guessing we have 5 minutes before that happens. 15 minutes after that, she'll come up asking if we want refills, and 15 minutes after that, we'll get cookies, when they're out and cooled just a bit." Which answers my chaperone question, too. Ciro paused on a classic movie channel, and a man calling himself Rufus T. Firefly began to sing about the wonderful changes he had planned for Fredonia now that he was president. Yep, chaperoning at a distance. Not that she'd think of it that way. I don't get up too much. Marzana leaned back, listening. The voices were faint, but she could make out actual words now. "Ciro, can you hear any of this from there?" He paused for a moment, then shook his head. "Not over Groucho." "Groucho?" she repeated, preoccupied. If Ciro couldn't hear the voices from downstairs, from where he was sitting, then neither would Honora when she came in. Ciro's reply was wounded. "I can deal with no small talk, but please tell me you've heard of the Marx Brothers." "Of course I've heard of them. I've just never watched a whole movie." "Well, you're in luck. This is the best one, and whatever noise comes up through the chimney will blend right into the craziness." Marzana nodded, satisfied. She dusted her hands off on her jeans and sat awkwardly in the big chair. "My mom recognized you. Do you recognize her or know how your mom knows her?" "My mother knows a lot of people," Ciro began carefully. "Not all of them are real open about who they are or what they do. Mom doesn't usually introduce us." "I'll bet you don't forget a face," Marzana guessed. "I don't usually forget a face," he admitted. "I think I've seen your mom. Yes." He kept his eyes on the Marx Brothers. "You said you couldn't talk about her. I'm guessing you get the same speech I do about deniability. Is that accurate?" "Very. I hate deniability," she added in a grumble. "Yeah, but your mom's working on this thing too, huh? That's what you said yesterday?" "Yes." Marzana contemplated the boy sitting cross-legged on the chaise. When she told him and JJ about the kidnapping, she'd framed it simply. "This happened. My parents are investigating." She'd avoided saying much about Emmett and the fact that she'd asked them specifically to investigate suspects, because admitting that her own parents were working with authorities from the city proper was a dicey thing to do. Still, Ciro had told the truth about his own family. The spinster was a legend in the Liberty, but she'd been dead for centuries, so it made sense that he was comfortable talking about his connection to her, and she didn't see any reason he couldn't have told her about his dad and grandfather. But fessing up to his mother's shenanigans, well, he'd trusted Marzana, Nyala, and Amelia, and JJ, though Marzana assumed that as Ciro's best friend, he already knew, with some pretty sensitive information there. Not everybody in the Liberty would understand what her parents were doing, even given the seriousness of the situation. But Ciro, she thought, probably would. An agent from down in the city asked for their help in tracking down a few suspects they thought might be involved in the kidnapping. I think Mom and Dad and one of Mom's lieutenants have one of those suspects in the living room. I think it's more or less an interrogation. There was a creak in the hallway. Marzana clammed up fast, and a moment later, 5 minutes on the dot from the time she'd predicted it, Honora stalked in with a tray in hand. "Cookies'll be up," In about a glass's time, she said. Thought you'd like something in the meanwhile. She set the tray down on the ottoman between the chaise and the chair with a rattle of lemonade glasses and apple slices, and stalked out again without another word to either of them, though Marzana thought she heard her mutter, "Hooray for Captain Spaulding," on her way out. "Wrong movie," Cyril said under his breath as he reached for one of the apple wedges on the tray. "This is duck soup, Captain Spaulding's from Animal Crackers." "I had no idea Honora was a Marx Brothers fan." Marzana got to her feet and tiptoed toward the door of the study. She heard the stairs protesting faintly at the far end of the hall as Honora stomped back down. "Okay, let's move. I'll find the note. You listen and see if you can make out anything they're saying." Ciro hurried over to the hearth. Marzana darted past the big table by the bow window, which was clean of papers and neat as a pin as always, and headed for a low cabinet full of various sized drawers that stood against the wall opposite the fireplace. Her mother was too cautious to leave things out even in her own home, deniability always making life difficult, but she wasn't totally paranoid. Some of the cabinet's drawers were locked, but Marzana was willing to bet that since this particular case was a mostly legal enterprise, Mrs. Huckleberry wouldn't have gone too crazy with security. She wasn't disappointed. She found Emmett's folder tucked into the top flat file drawer within half a minute of looking. A thin, perfectly ordinary-looking manila folder with PH for BK and PH printed on the tab, and a paperclip fastening something to the inside of the top cover. "Ciro!" Marzana waved him over without touching the folder and pointing into the drawer. "Take a picture for me." "Nice instincts." He took his phone from his back pocket, and Marzana watched with interest as he thumbed it on, turned on the camera, and documented the folder's exact placement within the drawer from 3 angles. "Good?" "Good." Marzana lifted it out gently, carried it to the table, and opened the top cover with care so as not to disturb the paperclip. There they were, the school photo and the color copies of the ransom note and envelope that Marzana had seen at the dining table, all tucked under the clip and facing a page covered with notes in both of her parents' handwriting. And then she heard herself make a small noise as she spotted a tiny drawing in the left-hand margin of the page. Her father's work, no question. He was a doodler. Marzana could picture the scene. Her mother pacing by the study window, tossing out ideas. Her father sitting at the long table, making notes and sketching his quick shape during a thoughtful pause. As she looked down at the drawing, a bird with an abnormally long, snake-like neck, a word she'd heard on Monday, but that she hadn't thought of since came sharply back to her. "Snakebird." "What is it?" Cyril asked. "Tell you later," she said quietly. "Camera again, please." Only when she was satisfied Cyril had enough images that they'd be able to exactly replicate the arrangement of the papers did she slide the copies out from under the clip. "Your daughter is safe for now. The price to have her back is $1 million. We will send instructions on Saturday. You will have 1 day to pay." The words had been irregularly cut from their original pages and affixed to a piece of ordinary loose-leaf paper with clear tape. The $1 million and a couple of the longer words had been assembled letter by letter. Thanks to the distinctive comic book lettering, it didn't look serious. It looked like a prop from a movie that wasn't planning to give the audience too close a look. It looked all wrong, like a letter containing deadly serious news that the sender had typed in a totally inappropriate font. She set it on the table, and Cyril climbed up on a chair in order to get the best straight-down picture he could. Then he nodded at the rest of the papers in the folder. "Shall we?" "Absolutely." It didn't take long to photograph the rest of the contents. There were 3 pages of her parents' handwritten notes, a few pictures of a street that ran along a canal with a little towpath and a bridge, and 2 typed and stapled pages of notes that presumably Emmett had brought with him. When Cyril was finished, he scrolled through the images, and they carefully replaced everything, putting the paperclip precisely where it had been before, and stacking each page exactly as it had been relative to both the folder and the page below it, or as close to exactly as they could manage. Then Marzana carried the folder to the drawer and placed it inside, and they double-checked the photos again to make sure it was positioned correctly. She closed the drawer, let out a deep breath, and glanced at Ciro, who was grinning like some kind of maniac. "That was fun," he admitted, shoving his phone back in his pocket. She smiled back. Yeah, it was. Marzana held out her hand and watched her fingers quiver. My hands are shaking a little. He held out his own, palm down. Mine too. So now what? Fireplace? I didn't catch much before you found the folder. Marzana glanced at the clock. It had been 11 minutes since Honora had dropped off the refreshments. A glass's time, Honora had said, before the cookies would be done. 30 minutes. Maybe she could preempt another visit before then. Marzana went to the ottoman, got the 2 glasses of lemonade, and passed one to Ciro. Here, bottoms up. I'll go for refills. And I bet then she doesn't bother us again until the cookies are done. The 2 of them chugged their drinks. So, who am I going to be listening to? Ciro asked between gulps. My mom, her associate Nick, possibly my dad. The guy they're talking to is Rob Gandreiter, I think. She paused to finish draining her own glass. He's a Liberty man, but he was in jail in the city proper until just recently. I'll fill you in on the rest later. Ciro nodded as he drank, then handed over the empty glass and returned to the fireplace. Marzana left him there to eavesdrop while she headed down to the first floor. The voices in the living room were much quieter than they had been before. Marzana restrained herself from going over to press her ear against the closed door and followed the cinnamon and nutmeg smell of Honora's snickerdoodles through the dining room to the kitchen. The steward was sitting at the little breakfast table, sipping from a coffee cup, with a battered copy of a book called How to Cook a Wolf, clutched in her knobby tattooed fingers. She looked up as Marzana entered and took in the empty glasses. Thirsty, were you? Marzana shrugged. It was good lemonade. There was an interesting flavor in there. Honora gave her a considering look, then harumphed in a peculiar way that somehow managed to convey surprise and pride, all while both looking and sounding completely dismissive. Juniper, she said. In my day, we spiked our lemonade with good strong Hollands. But since it's frowned upon to feed gin to children in these heathen times, juniper syrup's the best I can do. She stalked to the freezer and added a few ice cubes to each glass, then pulled a pitcher of lemonade from the fridge and a hand-labeled bottle from a shelf. She poured a bit from each into the 2 glasses and stirred the concoctions briefly with the handle of a wooden spoon before presenting them to Marzana. I'll be up with the cookies in a bit. Thank you, Honora. Marzana took the glasses and forced herself to walk at a normal pace until she was out of the kitchen and through the dining room. Then she sprinted up the stairs and into the study. Ciro glanced up and waved briefly from the fireplace, where he sat cross-legged, his face tight with concentration. Marzana deposited the glasses on the tray and hurried over to join him. Together they sat as the disembodied voices drifted up through the chimney. Not saying it's impossible that you did, that was Marzana's father's voice, but I am saying that if you did, there's no record of it. I can't help it if the blasted gatekeeper didn't do his job. Yes, that was definitely Rob Gandreiter. He sounded surly but tired. I wasn't going to remind him, was I? I'd been arrested, if you recall. It was an escape, for the love of all that's holy. And unless you're planning on turning me in, I don't see what this has to do with you. Of course, once a city cop, always a city cop. Marzana's father laughed. That's rich, coming from a fellow who was actively moonlighting as a customs asset less than 6 months ago. Once a city cop, always a city cop, Rob repeated coldly. Plenty said it when you turned up here. And if I'd been there when they said it, Mr. Hacklebaron retorted unconcerned, you'd have heard me say that they were welcome to come and say it to my face. But they, unlike you, were too smart to do that. A moment's pause. Then Marzana's father's voice spoke again, in a different tone. Say it again, Rob. Say it right to my face. Silence. Rob wasn't stupid. I would think that you would recognize the seriousness here, Marzana's mom said. For kidnapping, the Liberty will extradite. They just will. The thing is, that takes time. The other thing that takes time is raising a ransom if you're not rich, and the girl's parents aren't. So this isn't likely to resolve itself quickly. I worry that if the girl isn't found by the time an extradition happens, it won't be extradition for kidnapping. It'll be extradition for kidnapping and suspected murder. And if you haven't cleared your name before then, Mrs. Hacklebaron continued, well, Rob, I'll find you and hand you over myself. That's a promise, and I think you know I can keep it. Murder? I never thought of that, Marzana whispered. Somehow, though she'd recognized that things got much more serious if the ransom wasn't paid on time, the idea that the kidnappers might just up and kill their captive outright had never occurred to her. What are we doing sticking our noses into this? Trying to help, Ciro said quietly. That's what. What on the bleeding earth made you think this was me? Rob demanded in the room below. You still haven't explained that. Sent a danged bagman after me here. Here! Not out there, but here, on our own home grounds. And why? You say I'm a suspect, but let me ask you, do you really think I'd go to all the trouble of breaking myself out of the city hoosegow just to turn around and commit a crime on city turf? What did I just pick up a job on the way home? A kidnapping? Exactly how stupid do you think I am? I don't think you're stupid, Mrs. Huckleberry said darkly. And yeah, put like you just put it, you'd have to be stupid to do this. But not if it went down the other way around. Not if that door at the lockup, that oh so conveniently got left open for you to saunter through, got left open in exchange for your agreeing to play some part in the snatching of this girl. Every caper needs a good fiddlum Ben. After all, the phrase fiddlum Ben wasn't familiar, but the pause that followed it was. Marzana could perfectly picture her mother staring her prey down for a dramatic effect. So maybe we should start there. Who left the door open for you, Rob? How about you walk us through that? Another silence. Marzana hadn't heard Nick speak yet, but she had no doubt he was there, quiet, menacing, ready. Her mother would be perched at the edge of whatever surface she was sitting on, leaning forward with her elbows on her knees, her eyes hard and the rest of her face almost smiling. Marzana had seen her do that more than once, and it was unsettling as all get out. Her body totally still, the way a predatory cat could be totally, almost invisibly still, right up until the minute it lunged. Her father would be standing close by, his arms loose and his hands in his pockets, looking relaxed, but somehow also obviously ready in case Rob tried to make an unwise move. Who said anyone opened the door? Rob replied at last, but some of the bravado had gone from his voice. Had it from a customs officer and a detective who were in pretty strong agreement on the matter, Mrs. Huckleberry told him. What, you saying you picked that lock? What kind of lock was it again, Nick? Nick Larvin spoke for the first time. His voice managed to be both jolly and flint-edged. That was the Heaver Street prison, wasn't it? Not the worst accommodation you can get down in the city, that. Still, if memory serves, they installed new Ward's locks late last year. Brand new models they are. Ward's calls them Saturns, but all the gents I know who've encountered them refer to them as Hellcats, as they knot up picks like cat knots yarn. I managed to get my hands on one, in fact. Been working on it for 2 months, and I can't so much as move a tumbler. He laughed. Here's the deal for you. That lock's in my Gladstone bag out in the hallway. Let's see, I just run out and fetch it right now, and if you can show me how to pick a Hellcat, Rupert, I'll quit my employment this minute and sign on for whatever job you've got lined up next. The wisp of sound, barely audible, that whisked up the flue might have been a sigh. The man who opened the gate was a guard. His uniform patch said Flynn, but I never learned his first name. He said he suspected if I tried the door at a certain hour, I might find it was loose, provided I was willing to lie low for a couple of weeks before I came back here. That's all. Lie low and not return to the Liberty until this past Sunday. It did occur to me that he might be setting me up, but I figured without bars between us, I could probably manage him if he tried to retake me. He didn't, though. I never did figure out what the point of it all was, but I wasn't about to look a gift horse in the mouth. He was setting you up, Mr. Huckleberry said, as a red herring. The kidnapping took place on Sunday, and according to our contact, your name was all over the discussions almost as soon as it happened. You were literally their first suspect. Rob swore, but the word was muffled. Marzana pictured him dropping to a seat with his face in his hands. So now what? I'm telling you, this wasn't me. Not in any way. On the honor of my warrant. His liberty warrant, he meant, the paper that proved he was a permanent citizen of Gamerbund. Marzana and Zero glanced at each other. Nobody would lie against the honor of his or her warrant. The adults apparently thought so too. How about we start with you not disappearing when you leave this house, Mrs. Hacklebaron said. I'll pass this to the investigators in the city and let them follow up. But you stay visible, to us at least, in case we have any other questions. Don't go off grid. And you come straight back to me if you hear anything that suggests whoever took this girl has any connection to the Liberty other than you. Stay visible, Rob snorted. If it'll clear my name of suspicion in this thing, you tell me what to do and I'll do it. His tone turned sober. I'll put my ear to the ground, Babs. If I hear anything, it's yours. I'd appreciate that. Now, can I get an ice pack or something? I think this is going to bruise. I'll make you one to go, Marzana's father said. Come on. The scraping that followed was the sound of the pocket doors opening. There was no further discussion. The interrogation was over. Marzana got thoughtfully to her feet, returned to her chair, and reached for her lemonade. That was interesting. Cyril nodded as he followed. He took a wedge of apple bit and chewed. In the background, the Marx brothers were oddly silent as Harpo pretended to be Groucho's mirror image. We should write that down, he said at last, before we forget. Yeah, be right back. Marzana hurried to her room and grabbed her journal and pen. She paused in the hallway to listen for footsteps on the stairs, but there was nothing. Back in the study, she and Ciro reconstructed as much of the conversation as they could. After that, on the assumption that Honora's cookies had to be out of the oven by now, they settled back to their respective seats to at least pretend to watch Duck Soup. Sure enough, Honora surfaced about 5 minutes later with a plate of warm snickerdoodles and 2 mugs of milk. Enjoy now, she said, swapping them for the contents of the last tray. Figuring it might look suspicious if she didn't seem at all curious, Marzana followed Honora to the door. Is everything okay? She asked in an undertone. Things is calming down, Honora said cautiously, so to speak. Her eyes flicked down to Marzana's legs, then back up. You might try and not get that on the furniture, she commented with one eyebrow arched up high. Then she touched her knuckles to her forehead and took herself downstairs again. Marzana glanced at her knees. A dusting of soot showed where she'd knelt to lean into the fireplace. Shoot! She sat and scrubbed her pants with the hem of her t-shirt. Ciro shook his head. This doesn't bode well, does it? Marzana flopped back with a groan. Amateurs! We are such amateurs! She looked down at her hands. I better just go wash. Maybe get pants that won't turn state's evidence on me. Ciro reached for a cookie. I'll be here.